Hello, brothers, sisters, and friends, and welcome to the Fight Like Hell podcast. This is the official podcast of the National Association of Letter Carriers, the union that represents over 290,000 active and retired letter carriers employed by the United States Postal Service. I'm your host, Ed Morgan, and with me as always is our national president, Brian Renfro. Hey, Brian, how are you?
Hey, Eddie, doing fantastic. Great to be back on.
Yeah. We have a really good episode here, part two. We're going to get into the route inspection episode, and you're going to get into the before, the middle, and the after of route inspections. Ron Osborne and you have a really good discussion. Before we get into that, I just want to wish all our brothers and sisters that celebrate Hanukkah. Hanukkah is this week, so just happy Hanukkah to all our brothers and sisters that celebrate.
Yep, happy Hanukkah.
Yeah. So we have some news, some breaking news here. The JCAM, we have an update.
Yeah, but hopefully by the time you listen to this, and but more than likely by the time you listen to this, the JCAM, the new JCAM, the 2025 JCAM, will be available online. We just this past week finalized and signed off and all the official stuff with the JCAM, and we're really happy to get it done. It just historically, for those that may not know. Normally, you negotiate a contract, and historically, it takes a while to get the JCAM done. But something we tried to do in the last couple of rounds of bargaining is as we negotiated changes, in a lot of cases, to do JCAM language at that time. And we did quite a bit of that in this previous round of collective bargaining. So we're really happy to get it out there. I know for those of us, a lot of you listening that are shop stewards and handle grievances at any level, getting a new JCAM was almost like Christmas or Hanukkah. It was a really special time. So there's a lot of changes, obviously, with the new stuff that's in the contract, but also some additional changes to language. So we're really thrilled to get that out there, and that should be a great tool for our folks out there that do the hard work of enforcing our collective bargaining agreement and representing our members.
Just for someone that hasn't been exposed to the JCAM, and this might be a new word for them. Can you explain what it is?
Sure. So the JCAM stands for Joint Contract Administration Manual. So we have the contract, the national agreement, the collective bargaining agreement. It's got all these articles and it's got all this language. And the JCAM is basically that contract, but with detailed explanations that the parties have agreed upon about what it means. It incorporates a lot of different pieces. Some of those are previous national level settlements that interpret language in the contract. Some of those are national level arbitration awards. But basically, if you read a section of the contract, when you read it in the JCAM, you'll see that contract language, and then below it, you will see explanations about what it means and the parties' joint agreement on how it's applied. And at all steps of our grievance arbitration procedure, the parties, the union representative, the management representative, regardless of which step, the very first place they should always go is to the JCAM. The JCAM is several hundred pages that is designed to provide as much detail as possible, and the vast majority of questions that come up about the contract are answered there in the JCAM. So it's an awesome resource for us. It's actually fairly unique. Among unions, there are not a lot of unions that, number one, have collective bargaining agreements that are as extensive and detailed as ours. And then on top of our very detailed collective bargaining agreement, we've got this big, giant manual that we've agreed on that explains what everything means. So it's a resource that is intended to make things as clear as possible about what contract language means and even how it's applied.
Okay, great news. So you'll be able to check that online, and then the printed versions will be coming out later. In the building this week, we had the executive councils in session. Mm-hmm. What's on the agenda there?
Yeah, primarily just continuing our collective bargaining preparations. We've talked on the podcast about the National Rap Session. We did several episodes there. Hope everyone had a chance to listened to the recaps we did with the branch presidents, and we talked about how that was a big piece of our preparation for collective bargaining. The executive council, as a whole, discusses the economic portion of bargaining. So we've got subcommittees for a lot of different topics, but when it comes to things like Article 9 and our pay and the structure of our workforce and things that really impact our wages and some of our benefits, rather than handle that in a committee, we do that as a council. So the majority of the time this week here in DC, our executive council is here, and we're spending our time together, really digging deep into the economic piece and talking about all the we've talked before about everybody knows what our goals are, but it's about how do we prioritize them and how do we pursue them. And for the council, it's a really deep exercise. We have to consider all possible scenarios. We have to be prepared for the things that we know, the things that we that could be a little bit unexpected. Whatever turn negotiations take, whether that's in the bargaining process or potentially in preparation for interest arbitration, should we end up there, that we are in a place to present the best case in negotiations and or interest arbitration to achieve the best result that we can for our members. And the exercise that the council has gone through now for multiple meetings is to talk about all those scenarios and really map out what that's going to look like when we open bargaining next year. And we've dedicated most of our time here together this week. And, that'll continue as we get into January and have another rank and file committee. And we've got some surveys coming for all of our members to participate in, and this work will continue.
Yeah. So stay tuned. Keep abreast on all the information here on the podcast.
Mm-hmm.
So we're in the middle of December. Do you have anything going on next week? You going out into the field anywhere?
No, I'm actually not traveling next week. Strangely enough, as you get close to the holidays here in DC, there's a lot of the legislative and political, folks on Capitol Hill and the administration. There's a lot of things that start to happen. They have a lot of events, so it's normally the week prior to Christmas is a really good opportunity to have conversations about our priorities. Of course, we do that all the time. But in particular, when we get close to the holidays, before they break for the holidays and leave, there's a lot of opportunities to talk about our priorities. And we've been working on, our bills that we've talked about in Congress, but also with the Trump administration on ensuring that we do what we can positively for the Postal Service, and of course, put us in the best position to avoid any sort of attacks. And there's a lot of that happens in this upcoming week. So thought it was best that I stay in town so, can engage with the people that we need to engage with over the course of the next week.
Sounds good. So I also saw on the agenda that we had ACE training. Can you explain to our members what ACE training is? What's it about? Who goes to it? Where do we have it at?
Yeah, so ACE stands for Advocate Continuing Education. So our arbitration advocates that we train, we've got, some around the country that have been sort of recently trained over the last few years. We got some that have been doing arbitration for a long time. I think an important part of ensuring that at that final step in the grievance procedure at arbitration, that we provide the best possible representation by putting on the best cases that we can, is having the letter carriers that represent the union and other letter carriers in arbitration, not just to be trained initially, but to continue that education. So over the course of the year, we have a series of trainings where we get our advocates from around the country together. We have recently been doing it down in Marietta, Georgia, in a building there where the Region 9 office is, a building that we have there that's got a nice training facility. And we teach, advocates about the latest and greatest. It not only gives an opportunity for, their education to continue, but of course to hear from one another and strategize on certain topics. The Postal Service, just like they most people listening to this are familiar with, they often come up with some kind of initiative or here's what we're going to focus on. Well, they do the same thing in arbitration. So it's kind of like a monkey see, monkey do thing. So you may, if we start to see the Postal Service make a certain argument in one place, chances are that's going to spread and they'll do it in another. So being prepared, so we can best address those arguments and, of course, put on the best case we can. It gives us the opportunity to do that. So it's typically our national business agents, sometimes our regional administrative assistants in the office, and the folks, the arbitration advocates that represent letter carriers in arbitration. We get them together, and on average, we get people attend once a year. We have multiple sessions with different groups from around the country, and we're really committed to continuing that education and always looking for ways that we can improve it going forward.
My coworker said that the ACE was the first half of that training this week, and then they got into LMOU training. Can you tell us why they're getting into LMOU training and like how will they use that training?
Yeah, that was the primary, purpose of having this most recent one. So when we achieve a new national agreement, every agreement we've had going back decades now in Article 30 has certain topics that can be negotiated locally. Most letter carriers that are listening to this are familiar with this because it's just taken place several months ago. There's a period of time where local management, the branch, they have a roughly month-long period of negotiations on the 22 topics that are listed in Article 30. In many cases, they may agree to changes. In some cases, they may not agree. And where they don't agree, that's what we call an impasse. And there's a process where if it's a union proposal or a management proposal, it can be a union or management impasse. But in any case, we don't agree. Those are then sent up to the appropriate folks. For us, the National Business Agents Office, for the Postal Service, they handle these at the area level, and they are eventually resolved through an arbitration process. This is a different arbitration process than the normal arbitration we would do on just say a grievance where management violated the contract or a letter carrier got disciplined and we filed a grievance. That's rights arbitration, we call it. This is a process called interest arbitration. Similar process to what we do if we reach impasse in collective bargaining. So there are things about the processes that are similar, but there's a whole lot that are different. The main things that are similar is they're both called arbitration, and they both have an arbitrator and an advocate on both sides. Aside from that, they're very different. So when the local union and local management do not agree during that roughly month-long local negotiations period, and an item or items of those 22 from Article 30 are impassed, we make every attempt at the NBA office level to resolve them with the Postal Service. We do resolve quite a few of them, but ultimately some of them end up in what we call an interest arbitration process. And an arbitrator, each side will put on their case, evidence, why they believe the proposal that was made locally by the union or management, depending on which side you're representing, is the proposal that the arbitrator should adopt, and ultimately the arbitrator makes a decision. This is something we do every few years. So we get a new collective bargaining agreement. There's a local period that normally happens somewhere in the neighborhood of 60 days or so after we get that new agreement. So it's something that we run into these LMOU impasses and use this interest arbitration process just every few years. So we thought, whenever we do this, it's a good idea to get our advocates together that will be representing letter carriers and representing our branches and regions and the union ultimately in these interest arbitration proceedings. And some of them have done it before multiple times. Some of them have not done it before. But to ensure that we do everything we can training-wise to prepare them for that interest arbitration process to resolve these LMOU issues. Because, again, the interest arbitration process for an advocate, there are things that are similar in terms of the process, but the type case you're presenting, the way you do it is very different. So I was not there, but my understanding is it was a great session. And for those that we're unable to resolve through agreement with the Postal Service, we'll use that process. And as a result of the quality of the people that we have that represent the union in arbitration and this training, we feel really confident about the work they'll be able to do for those that we do have to go in front of an arbitrator to resolve.
Educated, prepared, and ready. Sounds good to me.
Indeed.
If you want to get more involved, listen more about the LMOU process. We've done an episode on it, so check the archives. Let's get an update on shutdown hunger. We talked about that a few months ago when the federal employees were furloughed and
Hmm.
the food banks were depleted. Just what's an update on that?
Yeah, so it's ongoing, particularly the piece where a branch can make a contribution to food banks and headquarters will match that. That's going to continue probably at least through January. The primary reason for that is branches that want to make this sort of donation. This is the kind of thing that the membership at a meeting, there would have to be a motion and they would have to approve. And there's a lot of branches out there that don't have meetings in December, and maybe some that when we announced this, they'd already had their meeting for that month. So it's sort of a little bit all over the board. But it's continuing. Our branches are doing a great job of after they've had those meetings, the membership in a lot of cases has approved a donation to help those food banks, and we at headquarters, of course, are matching them, so it sort of doubles up. And we got branches out there that are doing other things too, to collect food and get to their local food bank. And I think it's important, Eddie, to just remind folks, the shutdown, the government shutdown certainly had an impact on a lot of federal employees, a lot of people that were not paid, people that were furloughed, that stressed food banks. Those food banks, when the shutdown ended and federal employees were able to go back to work and they started getting paid, that did not mean that all of a sudden the shelves in these food banks filled back up. So it's really important, even though the shutdown ended, there's still a need for those food banks. And of course, we'll, do our part in almost everywhere come this May of 2026 through our Stamp Out Hunger food drive. But the food banks are still in a place where they need our help. And so far, the Shutdown Hunger effort is going good to kind of provide some of that interim relief between now and our Stamp Out Hunger food drive. And we expect that to continue over the rest of December and then into January.
Thanks to all the branches that participated. Great job, guys. So if you're watching this podcast, you'll see I got the big ship behind me. I'm here at the Maritime Institute. We're at Leadership Academy this week, week 3, graduation week for all the students. They're just doing a great job. They're digging in, working hard, and by the time this podcast comes out, they'll be on their way home. So safe travels to everyone. You were out this week, and you did your Ask Me Anything segment, and then you were helping out Paul Schwartz with our legislative and political class.
Mhm.
Do you just want to talk about the Leadership Academy for a minute?
Yeah, it's always so inspiring to go out there. I mean, we have we're on the 31st class of this Leadership Academy. And, as someone that was really fortunate at a young age to attend the Leadership Academy a long, 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 long time ago, it's been, just awesome for me in the 15 years I've been at headquarters to, have attended the class, had the opportunity to go out there and teach for years and years and years. I basically have, thanks to President Orlando primarily, have been the officer to oversee the Leadership Academy now for 10, I don't know, maybe longer than that, 10 plus years. Um, and even though we've had 31 classes of 30 people since 2006, that's, pretty easy math. That's a lot of people. The quality of the activists that we get that apply, it's more difficult than it's ever been for me to select them. And when we have each class, while each class is a little different, the quality of our people that we are training that are present leaders and are going to be leaders in the future is just not only does it never fade, I think it just continuously improves. And every opportunity I have to go out and spend some time with them is really special. And the Ask Me Anything segment, I think I answered their questions for, I don't know, almost 3 hours. It's like my favorite thing to do. I used to do it and it was like an hour, and then it was an hour and a half, then it was 2 hours. And this time it was approaching 3 hours. And, those folks out there, the union is investing in them to develop their skills. They're all working really, really hard. And, just like the previous 30 classes, long term, our union is going to continue to benefit from the work that they will do. And a large part of the work they do, large part of the success of the work they will do for letter carriers is due to the things that they've learned, and not only that they've learned, the things that they have learned to use themselves, but then they will also take and go pay it forward by teaching others.
So one of the questions that came up, I thought it was a really good question, and you gave a really good answer. So I would ask you to
Mm-hmm.
share it there. When you talk about the rap session or you do any of your branch raps or regional raps, you talk about the realities of where the post office is and where our union is when we're coming up on a day-to-day basis, and we're coming up in the contract negotiations. So
Mm-hmm.
Tourist Stewart from Branch 1071 in Southern Florida asked you, what are you positive about with our union? So can you give me an answer for that?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. There is so much to be positive about. As you mentioned, Eddie, on one hand, there are absolutely challenges. The Postal Service has, the future of the Postal Service is, always, it seems, at least in the last, you know, 15 plus years, has been not terribly certain. It's not been really clear. Obviously, over the course of 2025, there's been a lot of attacks on federal employees. Look, there's no question there's challenges out there. But in terms of our union, there's so much to be positive about. And it really starts with just a handful of things. If I were to just quickly assess where we as a union are, we've never been better organized than we are right now. We've never been stronger financially than we are right now. We've never had more influence on Capitol Hill. We've never had more influence with whatever administration may be in place. Look at 2025, attack after attack after attack. And when you look at where we are compared to so many others, in particular federal employees, we've not been impacted. And there's a reason for that. It's because of the collective influence between the things that we do in D.C. and what our members do locally, and the connection between the two, and the strength of our letter carrier political fund. We as a union have never been better at representing letter carriers, whether that is representing letter carriers that are injured on the job with OWCP. We've never been better at the grievance arbitration procedure, despite whatever shenanigans the Postal Service is pulling at the time, and they're always pulling something, it seems. Our representation continues to get better because we continue to invest in education. We also have, I think, never been in a better position or done a better job, frankly, of developing future leaders for the union, regardless of what someone's interest is, whether that is in being a representative in the grievance arbitration procedure, whether that's representing our injured employees with OWCP, legislative political activism, community service activism, food drive, and all the things we do for MDA. Through the education opportunities that are out there, from what our national business agents do to what our branches do to the things that we offer at headquarters, there's never been more opportunities for education. And as we go into 2026, we're excited to roll out a new e-learning platform that'll just expand that even further. Ultimately, the key to improving representation continuously is education. So while our strengths in numbers, financially, influence wise in the legislative and political arena, the quality of representation that we provide as a union, All of those things are better than they've ever been. The education. Ultimately, though, the primary strength and the primary reason that there is positivity from me and from most people about where we are now and about our future is just the quality of our members and the level of activism of the members of our union. The people that take the job as a letter carrier and get hired and become members of our union, the 290,000 plus members that we have are the most active membership of any union in the United States of America. Our union and that level of activism is literally the envy of every other union. Now, it's been that way for a long time, but it continues to grow. And as time passes and as the ebb and flow of different demographics, such as age and things like that, we have a whole new energy at different points in time in our history that has come into our membership and grown that level of activism and continue to take advantage of those things like educational opportunities. And we just continue to get stronger. And that this particular point in time is one of those times where we have a membership that is active, a membership that is ready to continue to fight, to do anything we need to do to achieve the thing, to protect what we have and achieve the things that are important for letter carriers. So, we have our challenges. There's no question about that, but we've also never been in a better place to confront those challenges than we are now.
Yeah. Well said. Thanks for sharing that. A really good answer. All right. Speaking of education, let's get into the second part of our route inspection podcast with Ron Osborne and Brian. And they're going to talk about, what to do prior to a route inspection, what to do during a route inspection, and how you handle after a route inspection. So let's go back to Brian and Ron.
So, Ron, I think the best way for us to take this is kind of the way we've done this in the postal record, where we went before, then we've got the week when the count actually happens, and then we've got after. So let's start with before the count. So let's, usually there's pretty significant, advance notice given. It's usually a pretty well-known thing that these things are scheduled. So let's say one of these is scheduled however long, 60 days or whatever from now. And let's start with the branch. Once the branch finds out this is happening, what's the first thing that we advise them to do? What type of planning should branches begin very early on when they find out one of these is coming?
So usually the way this works is the branch will receive a certified letter from management, and it will state that there is going to be a route count and inspection in a particular office, zone, installation, depending on the size of the installation. And that is what they consider the official notification, which they are required to notify as far in advance as possible. There is no specific time frame for that. Nowhere does it say they have to notify 60 days in advance or 30 days. It's as far in advance as practical. And if there are any changes to that schedule, which I'll talk just a little bit about that, because these things change. For example, what I'm hearing for the upcoming spring season is this is going to be one of the most aggressive route count inspection schedules that they've done in years, if not ever. They're going to be counting a lot of different places. So they bank on the fact that they could possibly get maybe a minor route adjustment agreement or an agreement out of the branch president. They'll use a scare tactic to say, we're going to come in there and take out 6 routes. But if you all will agree to take out 2, well, then we'll just take out 2. The thing about that is that's freeing up resources for them. When that happens and we have such an agreement, and I'm not trying to tell branch presidents of how to run their branch, but just bear in mind when you do that team that was going to come into that office, now they're freed up to go into another office, which causes a chain reaction in changes of route count and inspection schedules. So you were notified it was going to be the second week of January. Well, now it's going to be the fourth week of January. Or now, if it was going to be February, they're moving it up to January. And what we're doing when we do that is allowing them better use of their resources. My opinion is, if you don't have the bodies to do it, don't schedule it. You know, I like to meet that challenge and say, come on and come get it.
Mm-hmm.
That's always been my approach, you know, as far as minor route adjustment agreements go. So I encourage everybody out there, let's, you know, I'm not trying to tell branch presidents what to do, but let's be careful about those minor route adjustment agreements. Because technically a minor route adjustment can only be done if there is reasonably current route count and inspection data from a reasonably current. Now, what does that mean? Does that mean a year, 6 months? It's open to interpretation, but you can't do a minor until you've done a count. And
Yeah, and
that's not happening.
In most places where a route count inspection is scheduled, it's been a while since they've had one. So almost none of those places do they have reasonably current data. Okay, so as we move forward, you know, towards the count, let's talk a little bit about the, you know, what the letter carriers should be doing before the count starts. And I think it's really probably might be as simple as what we've already talked about to do with training. But is there anything else that our members should know if they're what's going to happen or what they need to be aware of prior to the week of inspection?
Well, I can tell you, Brian, you know, when I came into the post office and I had a bunch of old Vietnam vet letter carriers in that big 4 route office I was in, they were all Vietnam vets, and they'd been through inspections before, and they told me right off the bat, you need to do your route every day like you're being inspected, and you'll be fine when that inspection actually comes. You won't have developed bad habits, you know, you'll have knowledge of how it's going to go. And when that week account comes, it's just like a normal week, except for you got a few forms you're filling out, and you've got a whole bunch more managers running around the building watching you, but you're still doing your job the same way.
Mm-hmm.
Do your route prior to inspection, because you never know when it could come. And you also never know what could trigger a route count inspection. And one thing I'd like to talk about in particular is 271G. And what that is a special route count and inspection. 271G is when a single letter carrier requests a special inspection because they feel the route is overburdened. And there is some criteria that has to be met. You have to be over a half hour over 3 days a week for the past 6 weeks, and the route qualifies for special inspection. But if your route truly is over and it has to be relieved, that's got to go somewhere, which that's going to trigger other routes being involved in a count and inspection. And a lot of times the 271Gs convert into a traditional route count and inspection. And if you go by the handbook M39, they don't have to count every route in a particular zone or a particular unit. They can select individual routes to count. And that's all part of the unit and route review. But just bear in mind, a 271G request, you might not have been on a schedule for your whole unit to get inspected, but that 271G request may have triggered your unit to be inspected because it's got to go somewhere. It's got to come from somewhere when the territory moves around. Some of the other, I'll talk just a little bit about the before the week account. You know, management's got some things that they got to do. They've got to, of course, give that notification. They also have to do what is called a unit and route review. And this is something that we very commonly grieve because they very rarely do it right, if they do it at all. And the unit and route review has several items that are in the M39 that they're supposed to review. Your clock rings, your start times, case labels on the cases, the dispatch times, you know, when what the clerk schedules are. There's a bunch of things that have to go into this unit and route review, and that's supposed to be used to determine whether you're even going to do an inspection or not. Because if you corrected those things that you find in that unit in route review that are wrong, you may find that you don't have to inspect. You won't have routes over or under, so to speak. So also, they've got to conduct training with the letter carriers themselves on how to fill out the forms,
Mhm.
particularly the form 1838C, PS form 1838C, which is carrier's count of mail. During a route count and inspection, the carrier is going to count their own mail every day except for the actual official day of inspection. And they're going to record that on this form 1838C. Well, as Brian said earlier, a lot of letter carriers may have never been through a route count and inspection. It may have been 15 years since your last route count and inspection. It's not something we do every day, filling out these forms. So management has a responsibility to train the letter carriers on how to fill out the forms. And that's what's known as the dry run count. And that occurs within, not beyond, but within 21 days of the actual start of the route count and inspection. And what that entails is management going over the form, how to fill out the form, giving you instruction on how to fill out the form, critiquing how you fill out the form, and ensuring that you know how to do it and you can do it each day of the count. Now, commonly, here's what happens. It usually lasts about an hour. They come in, they go through the form. They don't ask too many questions. You know, you've always got the steward in the back of the room that says, "Oh, I don't understand. I need to take a little bit longer." And they want to cut them off and end it right there. Dry run training is, I'm going to say 75% of the time, dry run training is not done the way it was intended when the M39 was written. The intent is for letter carriers to be proficient at filling out these forms, and the forms are one of the most critical components of the route count inspection process. Back in the day, and this is a huge difference between today and the 70s and 80s, back then, route count inspections were what they called annual route count and inspections. Every year you got inspected. So letter carriers back then, 70s and 80s, they were proficient at filling out these forms because it happened every year. When we get into the 2000s, up close to 2000, and definitely since past 2000, it's been more selective of the units and the zones that get selected for route counts and inspection. Management likes to call that opportunities. That's one of my favorite words that they use. Opportunities. They look for those units where they think there's an opportunity to get some time out of that office, reduce the number of route numbers. Seldom, though they are supposed to, do they look for those offices that are critically overburdened and we've got Article 8 violations flying through the roof. They wait until a carrier puts in for a 271G before they'll go into one of those offices. So those are the things that happen prior to. In addition, I'll cover one more thing and I'll hand it back to you, Brian, for questions. That we have what we call 7 random weeks. So the way counts are set up, you got the week account and you have 7 random weeks that are prior to that, basically going back a year prior, excluding the months of June, July, August, and December. It's a union representative, usually a steward, that does a random lot draw. And this all has to happen within 4 weeks of the start of the count. The steward will draw numbers out of a hat, a 1, a 2, a 3, and a 4. And that determines the week of the month that is selected for the random lot draw. For example, if I draw a number 4 first, and I go all the way back, let's see, we're in December right now. So if we went back to November of last year, the 4th week of November would be the first week of the random lot draw. And that's your historical portion. So you'll have 7 weeks that are picked going back the year, random weeks, and whatever the performance for that route, that regular carrier, whoever the representative carrier is, that gets used in helping to determine what the value of the route is. in addition to the route count inspection. And then we'll get into what happens with that 8th week here in a little bit when we talk about after the week account. And that's basically the before section.
Excellent. Excellent. So let's talk about the week of the count. So the count happens over the course of 1 week. For someone that's maybe not familiar with this, Ron, why don't we start? Just describe like what could they expect? Like what's actually going to happen during that week?
Well, depending on the size of your unit, if you're that 2 route office, it's not going to be that invasive. You're going to have probably 1 or 2 route inspection team members in your office, and they're going to be recording information. And like I said, you'll be filling out 1838Cs. But if you're in one of these 50 route to 100 route offices, and some of these S&DCs we've got now, they've got 300 routes in the building. It's utter chaos. You may have 50 managers that are part of the route inspection team, to include your local managers that are normally there in the building. They are included as part of that inspection team. They're going to be running around with clipboards. They're going to be trying to document everything that a carrier does, all 100, 200 carriers or whatever. They're going to be asking questions. They're going to be trying to manipulate carriers they'll ask questions like, why did you do that? Or why did they do that? Because route examiners do not have the authority by the M39 to actually give instruction to the letter carriers during account inspection. Their purpose is there to observe. The local management, your supervisors, your station managers, your postmasters, they give the instruction to the carrier. But a lot of times you're going to hear these examiners, they're going to ask suggestive questions. Instead of putting it in the form of an order, they're going to say, don't you think it would have been better if you had combined these functions and got your parcels when you got your hot case, when you did? That's not what they're there for. So when that stuff happens, you've got to get with your steward and tell them exactly what's going on. And advice that I would give, and I know that we don't have people in each and every unit that are super sharp on route inspections, but we've got people in each region, and most of the branches out there have an expert, so to speak, on route inspections. You got to get with that steward. You got to get with those people and relay the information of what's happening to you during the count. What did management do? Be prepared to write a statement. Be prepared to be interviewed on something that might have occurred if we have grievances. And I'll guarantee you this, I promise you, there's never been one, and I doubt there ever will if we keep the current route count and inspection process for years to come. There's always going to be a grievance. There's at least one, if not 100. Always will be. So also during the week account, something that I like to tell letter carriers is it's not the time to try to be inspection ready, so to speak. As we said earlier, you want to do your route like you do every day of the week. The inspection, when the examiners come in and they start doing inspections, the difference is you're going to have some forms to fill out. You're going to have people in your way. It's going to slow you down a little bit. And I tell letter carriers this all over the country. If you don't have overtime during a route count and inspection week, your route's probably short, because the process itself generates overtime in filling out forms and answering the examiners, and the examiner being present and in your way, whether that be in the office or in the vehicle with you, or during the course of following you on the street when you're actually being inspected on the street. All of that actually creates overtime. So if you, during the week account, you get back in 8 hours, the deducted time for actually counting the mail, for answering questions of the examiners, talking to your manager about certain things, all that's going to be deducted, and you're going to end up short. So just keep that in mind. And the other thing that I would ask of letter carriers is, be professional. I'll give just a little story of a letter carrier that took some bad advice. It's probably been 7 or 8 years ago, and put rocks in his shoes. because somebody told him, put rocks in your shoes, you won't walk so fast. And the poor guy came back at the end of the day and his feet were bleeding. And luckily we talked him out of actually issuing discipline for doing such a silly thing. But don't play games. Just do your job. You know, if you're short, you're short. If you're long, you're long. If you need relief, you get relief. Now, we may have to fight for that through the grievance process, but don't play games with management. We want to take the high road and be the professionals. Let management be the unprofessional force out there. We need to be professional. And that protects letter carriers, that shows management that we're serious about, you know, getting counted, going through inspections, and we want a fair evaluation of our routes and a fair adjustment.
Ron, one thing you hit on there that was really, really important, I think, is what the letter carrier does during the week of inspection. And it's actually very simple. During the week of inspection, you should do everything the way you always do it. But I think also a really important point to make, you talked about the examiners are not supposed to instruct. If a letter carrier during that week of inspection is instructed by a manager, even by their normal supervisor to do something differently than the way they normally do it, what should they do? Let's highlight that piece again.
Well, the first thing they should do, you know, it's they need to let their steward know. They need to let the steward know what the change was from the normal. And I use this a lot of times in talking to letter carriers. If your normal day in the morning, management tells you to drive around the parking lot 3 times before you exit, then during the week account inspection, you should drive around the parking lot 3 times before you exit that parking lot. If they tell you to stop doing that for the week of count, then you need to let that steward know that, hey, this is not what I normally do. If you normally, another good example is if you normally, let's say you drive an LLV, you know, a long life vehicle, and you normally operate out of the front of the truck. All your mail is in the front of the truck. Then for the week account, they're going to tell you, well, you can't put all your mail up front. You can only put the mounted portion of your route up front. Everything else has to be done out of the back. That's changing the way that you normally do things. And what does that mean? What that affects is, I talked about that 1840B time or those 7 random weeks. It negates all that because you were doing things that normal way for that historical period. And now they're saying, do it this way because we think it's faster, so that they can select that lower time at the end. So let your steward know, let your branch representative know, let your union representative know anytime they give you instruction to change what you normally do.
Excellent. So the count plays out over the course of the week. It's not over. The week of inspection is over, but we're not even close to being over with the entire process. So let's talk about what happens after the count. And this is the letter carriers, for the most part, the involvement of every letter carrier is not completely over, but the majority of it is done during the week of inspection. But for shop stewards and for branches and grievance representatives, the work is kind of just beginning. So let's talk about what happens after the count is over, after that week of inspection.
Great. So after the week of count, we talked about there are 7 random weeks that are used. Well, there's an 8th week. And that 8th week is that week immediately following the week count. Now, for me, if I'm a steward, that's when I'm going to start gathering information, all the stuff that happened during the week count. And I'll talk in a minute just a little bit about grievances and filing the grievances, what to file, when to file, and things like that. But after that week count, we need to make sure that letter carriers understand that it's not over because that week counts too. So if you follow the concept of do your route every day like you're being inspected, then you're not going to have a problem with the 7 weeks, You're not going to have a problem in the count week, and you're definitely not going to have a problem the week after. One thing that I notice is that week immediately following is where we catch management and their changes that they made just for the week of count. Because they will go right back to what they were doing and the instructions they were giving and the way that you were casing your mail, the way you were loading your truck, the way the vehicles were parked, everything that you normally did before the count started. They're going to go right back to that in that 8th week. And that's where we catch them, because that 8th week is part of the inspection set. It goes with that 7 random weeks. So it's very important that you continue to do your job as you normally do by the M41, during that 8th week. Now, for grievance handlers, this is the point to where you're going to start compiling data. And there are different opinions out there in the field on how to file these grievances. I know a lot of people, every time something happens, let's say management deducted 1 minute, redlined an 1838C, took away a minute that a carrier had recorded, and they want to file a grievance for that one specific thing. You're going to end up with thousands of grievances. Okay. Now, I'm not saying that's wrong, but it is also dependent upon, number one, the size of the office. How many union representatives do we have to work on these grievances? And can I get these grievances processed timely? And that's the key, is the timely part. A lot of times, a lot of branches are successful in filing these individual grievances as it goes through the week of count. But most of the time, you just don't have time, because if you're the steward in that office, you're getting counted too, right? It's hard to do both. Though you are allowed to do your steward duties, you can't be on steward time every day of the count because you're getting counted. So I encourage people, and it is my opinion, the best avenue is the big grievance at the end. And all of that, it's the way you put together your issue statement. Your issue statement on that grievance, the trigger is the implementation of adjustments, not the count and inspection itself. Your individual issue statement should have, did management violate, Article 19 via M39, M41 when they implemented adjustments resulting from the count and inspection that occurred. So now you've got your trigger, your incident date of the implementation, and with the language including the count and inspection, now you get to throw everything that happened in the route count and inspection in the case file, and you will not be untimely on that. We've won those cases. We continue to win those cases. I'm not saying don't file individual grievances. There are a couple that I think that we should file immediately, especially when it comes to route examiner conduct. If there is an issue with a route examiner that's getting out of line, that could perhaps turn into something else other than just a grievance under Article 19 for a violation of the M39. That could be a JSOV. We don't want to wait on that. I think that we should immediately file those grievances, because if we wait until a month later or 2 months later for the implementation to say that this route examiner did something that was a violation of JSOV, we're probably going to get slapped with the timeliness issue. I would file those grievances immediately. I would also recommend that schedule changes. Those are grievances that you could file when those changes happen. For example, they've given you written notification through a certified letter that you're going to have a count inspection during this week. Then they change it, but they don't tell you about it. I would file that grievance immediately. Those two are the main ones that I would file immediately. Everything else you can pretty much wrap into that one big, beautiful picture. Because if you get in front of an arbitrator, which a lot of our route adjustment and route inspection cases do, you get in front of an arbitrator, you got one or two little pieces. It's not enough to show what management did it wrong, but there's not enough of an impact. And the proof's in the pudding. Because I know a lot of the advocates out there, I'm sure, that have done route inspection cases, the arbitrator is going to ask the question, well, how are they running now? How are the routes running now after the count inspection and after the adjustment? Well, everybody's running 8 hours. Okay, so that 1 little minute for that one little line 22 that they deducted from is de minimis, and they're not going to toss the count and inspection out. You want as much as you can get in that case file, and you want to show the impact, the big picture impact on the unit. Okay.
Yeah, Ron, it's a really good point. We've very strongly advised this for years with route adjustment grievances is you grieve, as you said, the adjustment phase at the end. Because when you look at this entire process, and frankly, you can do this, look at almost any route count and inspection that happens anywhere, you're going to have dozens, if not more, violations and errors that happen. And every single one of those, while in isolation might be small, it might be a minute or two here on a particular day. When you get to every one of those contributes to the adjustment being bad and being in violation of Chapter 2 of the M39. So if you envision this, if you're a shop steward out there, you have to look at it this way. We want to put a grievance together that if we're sitting in a hearing room in regional arbitration and we're grieving this adjustment file, this adjustment as compared to, 78 individual grievances, we've got it all in this one file, and we basically sit there and this is literally what our advocates do in these hearings is go through and show each of these violations. And when we can show all of these violations and how that directly contributes to, a adjustment being just simply wrong, which they almost always are. Frankly, a lot of times the arbitrators, you'll get a certain, some say halfway into it and they're like, I got it, they just completely blew this up. So, as you progress through, especially starting that week after the count, shop stewards, those in the branches, just begin to put this stuff together. You're not necessarily at that point putting it into, wrapping up a final grievance file by Wednesday of the week after the week of inspection. But you should absolutely start organizing and collecting and documenting all of this information. So, Ron, you mentioned the carriers. The week after the inspection is the 8th week, and as you said, we should do our jobs the way we normally do it, just like we did in the months leading up to and during the week of inspection. What else would a carrier see happen as this process plays out when we get into this after phase of the after the week of inspections done and what the Post Service does with all the information to eventually come up with a route adjustment?
So after that 8th week has occurred, that's when the data starts being compiled. Management compiles all this data into various different forms. So I'll go through kind of a breakdown of how one form feeds another form. So you have an 1838C, which is a carrier's count of mail. One of those is done every day on every route. Okay. That document feeds what they call the 1838, PS form 1838. That document is a summary of everything that occurred during the day, both the office time from the 1838C and the street time from the carrier's either clock rings for that day, or if they were actually being inspected and had a manager with them, from that documentation, which is a PS form 3999, which is the inspection of a letter carrier route. That creates the 1838. And there is an 1838 for each route for each day. So you got 1838C, each route, each day, feeds the 1838, each route, each day. And then at the end of the count and the end of that 8th week, those 1838s fill another PS form, which is the 1840. And that is the summary of the count and inspection. It encompasses everything. So the 1838s all get compiled for that week, and they feed the 1840. The 1840 is the big picture of everything that happened. And that will have what your averages are for your office for each day. That will have what your average street times were for each day. And that will have if there were any auxiliary assistance. And I want to talk just for a second on that auxiliary assistance, because this is a little known fact that a lot of grievance handlers, especially, I know management doesn't know it in a lot of cases, but auxiliary assistance is generally discouraged during the week of count. But if it does occur during a week of count, the time that the carrier that provided the assistance, that time is not what counts. The time that counts for the auxiliary assistance is from that regular carrier's actual $39.99. So if during the week of count, it should happen that, and it does, because I'll give a prime example is carriers that are on restrictions. They have an 8-hour restriction. But they're at the end of the day, they hit 8 hours, they're not done with the route. There's going to be auxiliary assistance. So let's say the PTF took 2 hours to do streets number 1 and 2. Okay. That's not the time that gets recorded. The time that gets recorded is the 3 hours that was recorded on the regular carrier's $39.99. It's regular carrier time only, not replacement carrier time. The same is true with the PS form 1840 that's got all the information at the end. Most places we've got T6s out there and they carry 1 day during the count inspection. That day does not count. It is what they call bracketed. On that form, you'll actually see brackets around that day, and it is not counted in that average. That way, you're only using the regular carrier's information. So after all that happens, the 8th week's over. What's going to happen is the carrier is going to get a consultation over that PS form 1840. This which is basically kind of like the joint process when I said our evaluated time. They're going to go over what they think your evaluated time is and what they're selecting for your evaluated times. Just the same as in the joint process, except we don't have a union person sitting in the room with you. There's no requirement for them to have a steward present during that consultation. Okay? So be careful about that, because I know a lot of letter carriers ask for a steward. There's no requirement for them to have that steward in there during that consultation. They will go over what the averages for the week account were, what the averages for the 1840B or 7 random weeks time was, and they're going to basically give you the picture of what you think the route was. Okay. This is the point where letter carriers really need to pay attention. Okay. The union, union rep, your steward or whatever, of course, is going to request these documents. But we all know that sometimes documents, what they look like when we got that consultation, change from the time that the union gets the information from the information request. Let your stewards know what you were asked. Let them know how the consultation went. Try to remember exactly, what did they ask you? What did they suggest to you? And give that information to your steward or whoever the union representative is that's covering the potential grievance there. Union reps, don't be afraid to do an interview sheet with letter carriers. You can set the questions up that you want to ask about the 1840 or about any part of the route count inspection, and have the letter carrier answer the questions instead of just volunteering information in a statement or whatever. Sometimes that's better, especially if you have multiple interviews and they all say the same thing. When you get in front of an arbitrator, the arbitrator says 20 carriers said the same thing, that's to our advantage. And that's the way we want to go with that. Following that consultation, that's when it goes into the adjustment phase. And as I said earlier, there's a couple of methods that can be used, a couple of programs. The DOAS program and the core program. More than likely, it'll be the core program, but it could be DOS. In some offices, core can't be used for various reasons. The mapping can't be done accurately, or maybe it's a two-route office. There's no sense in using a core program when you're only going to move one street from one route to another. So depending on which program is used, the forms are all basically the same. The process has to comply with Chapter 2 of the M39, regardless of which program is used. And I want to put emphasis on that for our grievance handlers. If you look in the M39, nowhere in there will you see the acronym DOS or CORE. The M39 is set up as a manual process. The agreements that we have is that those programs must comply with the provisions of the M39. So if management were to change something in a program and we catch it, then we of course are going to grieve the fact that they're not complying with the handbooks and manuals, the M39 in particular. So once they use one of those programs, territory gets moved. One street gets moved off one route to another route. Bear in mind, a lot of times, it's kind of like I said with the 271G earlier. If you're the route that's heavy and you're a 10-hour route and you're up in the upper left-hand corner of the zone, it's going to create the domino effect. Everybody gets touched because of that one route. So it's important that we follow that trail. And in RCIs, this is all unilateral. The only way we can follow that is through the 1840 reverses, which either come from DOS or come from CORE. And they are the proposed territory moves from one route to another. They're broken down and set up into additions and reliefs. In other words, if I take 100 to 200 East Main off of one route and put it on the other, it will show up as a relief from the losing route and an addition on the 1840 reverse for the gaining route. Okay. And we've got to put all these pieces of the puzzle together because a lot of times that's where we lose time credit, especially in the allied time section. For example, normally I'm on a park and loop route, and let's say the 39.99 that they did on me, I averaged 8 minutes per relay. Maybe this relay was 20 minutes and this relay was 2. Just depends on how much mail you're putting in the bag, right? The core program, especially, averages those relay times. So if territory is added to you, a relay time is added to your route, it will add the average time from the other relays, not necessarily the actual time. So it's important for stewards to go back, and you're going to have to look at each one of those 39.99s to see what the actual relay time was. And the same is true for parcel deliveries. When there's a parcel delivery on a loop, the same is true if you have an express mail that you ran, you deviated for. The same is true for a customer contact. All of those things, that core program averages them and doesn't necessarily give you the actual time. So you got to fall back on the PS form 39.99s that are used. And I'll touch on the 99s a little bit too. When management inspects a letter carrier's route, they can basically go to the street with the carrier and do a 39.99 up to 3 times, no more than 3. They have to at least go once because you have to have a 39.99 to move territory. Only one of those 39.99s gets used when it comes to the adjustment portion that I'm talking about now. On the schedule that gets posted, you will see the letters DOI, Day of Inspection. Okay. Typically, and by the M39, that's the day that gets used, but it might not be, because if management goes 3 times, they're required to use the 39.99 or the day that they went to with the carrier that is closest to the average times of what was selected. It does absolutely no good if the day of inspection 99 was 5 hours on the street, but we've determined that this carrier has 7 hours on the street average time. You're not going to get a good adjustment out of that. So maybe you're going to go with one of the other 99s that's closer to that 7 hour mark. It's a requirement. It's not an option for management. It is a requirement that they pick that 39.99 that is closest. Then once all the 1840Rs are done, they've proposed, they moved this territory, whether it be DOAS or core, they've got it all together on the 1840R. There's a consultation with the carrier going over those proposed adjustments. This is what we're proposing we're going to do to your route. That's your big last chance to get in there and say, hey, this will work or this won't work. That's when you get in there again, you say, look, you're taking me the wrong way down a one-way street. I can't do that. This is your chance to say, well, hey, that piece of territory, that street, that relay came from Carrier Joe over here who's 25 years old and I'm 55. And you're giving me territory from a 25-year-old. I can't do it that fast. Also, the same in reverse. Maybe you're getting territory from the carrier that's 55-year-old and you're a 25-year-old. This is your chance to get all that. Management is required to document all of the comments of the carrier on that 1840 reverse. And then, of course, your union representative is going to request those documents with all those comments on them to see exactly what the letter carrier says. That, compared to the interview that you did or the statements that were provided by the carrier, tell you exactly what happened in that consultation. And it's a good place to catch management in a lie, because a lot of times they're not jotting down all the carrier's comments. They're just hitting the highlights if they write down anything at all. From that point, once that consultation is done, management has 52 days from the end of the count to actually implement those proposed adjustments. So that's a pretty tight timeline, especially when they're using core. There are only so many core techs out there in the world, and there are all these adjustments going on at the same time, and one core tech may be responsible for 7 different zip codes. They'll run right up to the line on that 52-day implementation, or they'll miss it, at which time you're probably going to get a letter from a district manager saying, due to operational circumstances, we're extending the 52-day period. That's not good enough. It has to be a legitimate operational consideration, not just the fact that we couldn't get it through core fast enough, not just the fact that we couldn't get the consultations done. The intent of that exception for the 52 days is when you have a situation like a natural disaster, you know, or maybe there was a problem and for a week or two, the post office just had to shut its doors. Maybe we had an asbestos abatement that we had to deal with, or maybe there was a leak in the water pipes or something like that. Those are the reasons for extending the 52 days, not just the fact that we can't get it through the core program fast enough. We need to grieve that. And we are winning those grievances. So that gets us to the point of where we're up to the implementation.
So, yeah, and Ron, just one little thing I'll add. There's also I think it's worth reinforcing. You know, you mentioned several things that the letter carrier should look for, particularly in those adjustment consultations and what shop stewards are looking at on the 1840 reverses. And you know, allied time has long been a topic that we've dealt with, trying to do our best to take an imperfect process of evaluating the time value of territory when we move it from one route to the other. But I think it's worth saying again here that every little piece like that in detail is important. It may not feel like it's all that important in isolation, but the cumulative, when you add all these little things up, the impact that they have on the route adjustment is really important. And, you know, for the letter carriers out there, the adjustment consultation, you should absolutely pay attention there communicate with your shop steward. Pretty good chance that your shop steward's going to have some questions for you, more than likely, for at least a lot of the carriers as they start to dig through the just mountain of paperwork and forms and things like that. Ron, before we wrap up, I based on all the experience that you have, I just want to give you the opportunity first to offer, based on everything that you've seen and what we're seeing currently. Is there any advice or anything in particular you think is important that we haven't talked about to communicate to our branches out there that are looking for contract enforcement and potentially dealing with these grievances?
So sure, Brian. I guess for letter carriers, one of the things, and I didn't talk about this earlier, fill out those 3990 PS Form 3996s every day, before, during, and after the count. Fill those out. Those get used. They back you up to support your times that you document. Equally as important, fill out the cut slips, the 15 PS Form 1571s. That is a huge one, and that's something that I've seen since the counts came back here in the fall of last year, is we're missing a lot of curtailed mail. Now, during a count, it's supposed to be clean in, clean out. In other words, if the count starts on Saturday, we don't have a bunch of mail curtailed for Saturday on the Friday. That Friday, everything's cleaned up. And the same is true coming out the back end. On the last day of the count, we shouldn't be curtailing mail. All the mail should go during that week. Okay, that's a huge thing that we're not catching, is that curtailment of mail. We've always had the situation out there where management, we catch them hiding the mail in the tractor trailer trucks at the plant or whatever. We've always had that thing, and that's it's kind of separate from this. What we're talking about is in the office. If we're curtailing mail, we need that cut slip to show the letter carrier filled out the slip and showed I curtailed 2 hours worth of mail or 500 pieces of mail, whatever that mail is. And what was the reason for that curtailment? Especially management tells you to curtail. You don't get to just do it on your own. They tell you to curtail. And that's what I'm writing on there. As per management, curtailed 400 flats or 500 letters or a box holder. Didn't take the box holder. That's a huge one that I'm seeing. Is normally we'll have 1 or 2 box holders, or you call them different things, red plums in some places. They're basically a full coverage circular. Those are being curtailed and not being taken when they're normally you get 1 or 2 a week. And all of a sudden you don't have any show up during the week account because they add a lot of street time. And they add a little bit of office time just getting the darn things out of the parcel hamper. I encourage everybody, pay attention to those 1571s. For the grievance handlers out there, I encourage, this is what I've always done with route inspection cases. Organization is key in getting your grievance together. I always organize my case file by route. In other words, I have a pile of forms and papers and interviews, statements for each route. Route 1 through 20, I'm going to have 20 stacks. And that keeps me organized. I'm going to go through each of those stacks and pick out each of those violations. In today's time, used to be, back in the old days, it was all pen and paper, but hey, you can use a spreadsheet now. Even cooler, use an Excel spreadsheet, and you have a column for each of the routes, and you can have rows in there for each particular violation. What section of the M39 or M41 was violated? And you group those things together. So Route 1, I've got 27 different grievances. These are the violations for Route 1. For this section of the M39, for that section. Route 2, here are the ones. And what that helps you do when you get in front of that arbitrator and you've got that big picture, an arbitrator does not want to read through 10,000 pages of a route inspection grievance. They're not gonna. Let's be realistic. They're not gonna do it. So it's up to you to paint the picture and show the violations. And if you put that together on a spreadsheet or just on a graph or whatever, and show the violations over all the routes, broken down by route, management's not going to be able to come back to you and say, oh, that didn't happen. Because you're going to be able to go, here's where it's at, and that's the page number it's on in the case file. And it's going to help you with your cases.
Yeah, that's an excellent suggestion. What we're effectively doing here in route adjustment grievances is taking a very complicated issue that involves tons of documentation, and we're trying to paint a picture by making it as simple as we possibly can. And, you're right. The arbitrator's one thing. I mean, there are countless hearings out there where, of course, we as the union advocate, we're going to go through and show all the violations and the documents. And most of the time, I don't know of any of them that have ever gotten through, those thousands of pages over the years. But the quicker we can paint that picture for them, the better. And for you shop stewards out there that are filing these grievances at informal A, or if you're a formal A rep dealing with one, the simpler you can make that before it goes up to step B, the better in terms of. And look, there's plenty of help out there. There's, as we said, reach out to your national business agents. If you call our headquarters, Ron will be more than willing to help you with anything that you need. Ron, I think it's really important before we wrap up here. I just want to offer to really two groups of people. Number one, our grievance filers that are dealing with route adjustment grievances. There's no grievance that is more work. It's the most cumbersome, time consuming grievance that anyone will ever do. And it's frankly, there are sickos like you and I that have done this for a long time that enjoy it, but it's not necessarily the most fun thing in the world for most people. So I want to thank all of our shop stewards and our grievance representatives at the branch level, and of course, same at step B and going through those files and writing impasses, and of course our advocates that present them in arbitration. They take a almost a new level of commitment and dedication and perseverance, frankly, to get through and produce a really high quality route inspection grievance. And then I also want to thank the just thousands of people at this point we've had over the years that have served in joint route adjustment processes. When you are sitting and you've got 50% of the decision making power and management's got 50%, sometimes you make decisions that are the right decisions per the agreements that are in place, and one side or the other most of the time is not going to be happy with it. So they're not always the easiest positions to be in.
Mm-hmm.
Anybody listening to this is probably familiar with being in that position, but this thing has the route adjustments that we've had in the past, the joint processes we've had in the past have been successful. Yes, because they've gotten better in terms of what we've negotiated, but primarily because of our people. So I think it's really important we shout out and recognize the grievance handlers at whatever step that have dealt with and will continue to deal with route adjustment grievances, but also our folks that have served and represented letter carriers in joint processes.
Absolutely. I agree 100%, Brian. That's the most people, and I know all the route adjusters that you talked about, especially the joint route adjustment team members that we've had over the years, they'll all tell you the same thing. We always do better in a joint process.
Mm-hmm.
We always no process is perfect. Are we going to adjust every letter carrier route in the country perfectly, whether it's RCI or whether it's joint process? No, there's no way that you're going to get them all right. But historically, we always do better when we're sitting at the table making the decisions with management and not having to react to the decisions that management made unilaterally. We've always
Exactly. Well, thanks, Ron. Appreciate you taking some time to join us.
Thank you so much, Brian.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Fight Like Hell podcast. Please subscribe so that you don't miss an episode. And please share this podcast with our NALC brothers and sisters. You can follow the NALC on social media using Facebook, X, and Instagram. You can find links to our accounts in the description below. May your steward be by your side, and may the union have your back. Thanks for listening. See you soon.